Let's start right here in Ottawa, where public hearings into the Fed's invocation of the Emergencies Act are set to start in just 1 month's time. Opposition Tories say the government's use of the act was a power grab, but the government insists it was necessary to stop the convoy. That convoy arrived on January 28th, drawing thousands of people to the capital city's downtown core over the weekend. Many stayed, and on February 6th, the mayor of Ottawa declared a state of emergency. On February 11th, the Ford government declared one for the province. On February 13th, a letter released by the city confirms Mayor Watson offered to meet with organizers if they agreed to leave residential areas. On February 14th, the feds invoked the Emergencies Act. A key figure in those negotiations was Dean French. He's the former chief of staff to Ontario Premier Doug Ford and founder of Dean French Advisor Co. Hi, Mr. French. Good to welcome you to the show. I appreciate you making the time for this.
My pleasure.
So last week, some news on the invocation of the Emergencies Act, some cabinet documents that showed that the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister had advised them the night before invoking the act, the government, that there was the potential for a breakthrough. And it seemed to be in reference to discussions, or at least the minister's office later said, discussions that were happening between the city of Ottawa and the protesters. Is that a reference in your view to you and negotiations you were leading?
Yeah, there was only one mediator working between the City of Ottawa, Mayor Watson, and Tamara's group, the Freedom 55 Convoy, and that was me, a private citizen. And the idea was to not make it about me and just try to do my best to de-escalate what I saw was a situation that was getting heated up. And I knew a few of the players, including Mayor Watson. We'd worked together in the past, even though I'm a conservative and he's a good liberal. And so that was me.
And so before I get into what happened during those negotiations and that cabinet document, how did you come to play that role? You say it's like you're doing it in a personal capacity. You used to be the chief of staff to the premier. Yes. He's the premier of the province. This is happening. Does he call you up? Does someone from the federal government call you up? Like, how did that work?
So it starts with a good friend of mine and saying, Dean, I'm a little concerned. Things seem to be escalating. I think the truckers have probably made their point, and I know you know people. Would you think about it? And at the same time, I got a call from former Premier Brian Preckford from Newfoundland, who asked if I would speak to Keith Wilson, the lawyer for the convoy. And we had some calls. I felt confident enough that and I was very clear on where my position was. I'm not in favor of protesting on residential streets. I don't like horns, but I do want to listen, and I do want to see if we can bring the temperature down before this escalates, before somebody gets tired, whether it's a trucker or a police officer, and something not very good happens. So I reached out to Mayor Watson, made a call on the Thursday.
And sorry, this is like the Thursday towards the end of the 3 weeks.
So this is this is the Thursday before the Sunday cabinet meeting.
Got it.
Very, very tight timelines. So the mayor and I have a chat, and I let him know where I stand. We're in agreement, and let him know that I'm willing to do this, and also my conditions: not being paid, doing this on my own, private citizen, not going to be speaking to Queen's Park, not going to be speaking to Premier Ford or Katie Telford or any of my contacts in Ottawa. I made it clear. So that was Thursday. He hands me over to his chief of staff, Serge, who we had worked very closely with during the Ottawa floods, had a high level of trust. Jumped on a plane on Friday. Met with the group, documented in the media, met with the group on the Friday night for basically ordered in pizza at the Westin, sat down with them, listened first. All he did for 45 minutes was listen, which is really, quite frankly, what they were looking for. And I went into it before I flew out saying, I think I got about a 2 out of 10 chance that we could get these two sides together. At the break, I called the mayor's chief of staff and said, we're at 8 out of 10. I think we can do this. We were done the deal that night, essentially. We went back and forth a little bit on Saturday to come to an agreement. It's public now. On Sunday, by the way, on Sunday, 5 hours before that cabinet meeting, 5 hours before that briefing, there's a letter from the mayor putting his demands and a response, as you know, from Tamara. And so that was so as far as the security advisor advising the prime minister and the cabinet, that was in the public domain by 3:30, 5 hours before. So that's a little bit of the timelines. Does that help a little bit?
It does. So I just want to be clear. So you're basically going between the mayor's office and Tamara Leach and the group she represents. Is it her specifically that you're negotiating with?
Right across the table from Tamara, and there was what I'm going to call her executive group of probably 7 or 8 other individuals.
And the deal you're trying to broker is what? Move trucks from residential areas?
Yes.
Or end the convoy?
It starts with look, If you don't get this part about me, I'm not in favor of you guys being in residential areas. They respond by saying, Dean, this was so organic and so sort of how it wasn't the Teamsters, it wasn't one organization. They said, we didn't realize how big this was going to be. So we never wanted to be in residential areas. I'm like, great, we agree with something. And then it was pretty clear, the mayor's conditions that he put in his letter, that's basically what I verbalized I thought the mayor was looking for. They listened, they were respectful, Tamara in particular. And that night I remember getting to a steakhouse about 10 o'clock on the Friday night with the chief of staff to the mayor of Ottawa and saying, we're good. They want a peaceful resolution. All they really want is to get out of the residences so Mayor Watson will then talk to them. Remember, not a single politician had even listened to them. And that's a Canadian trait, to listen. That wasn't happening. And Mayor Watson made it clear, if you don't move out of the residences, I'm not speaking to you. But Wellington was sort of like everything but Wellington.
Okay, and we'll get to that part in a
Yes.
second, but I'm just trying to go through the timeline for our viewers. And so then this all comes to light that there is an agreement on the Sunday, and we know there's a cabinet meeting that follows, and that's what I kind of prefaced the interview with, right? So when Jody Thomas, the National Security Advisor, is telling the government there is the potential for a breakthrough, is it your assessment that that potential she's talking about is the negotiations that you were going, like this is the breakthrough? Did you feel there's a breakthrough? And how do you define breakthrough?
So I define the breakthrough, and I think the word should have been there is an agreement, because Tamara's own words in her letter, it's a one-page letter from the mayor, a one-page letter from Tamara, very easy to pick up on. Her final quote was, we will be doing our best to start on Monday, which they did. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, they had to be referring to that. But again, it was 5 hours before the meeting. It was pretty clear. I'm surprised the wording from the security advisor to the prime minister and the cabinet, I'm surprised it wasn't a little bit more direct. The mayor has an agreement, quote unquote.
So here's where I think I can challenge the idea that it's a breakthrough, and I want to hear your response to it. First of all, we know that Pat King, another organizer, immediately denounced that agreement and said, stand your ground, in a video, I think that was posted on social media. Tamara Leach at the time then said there isn't agreement, the media is lying, and then later, did say that there is one, right? Yeah, walked it back. So there is some confusion there. And then the next day, when the act was actually invoked, I don't have an exact count, but not all the trucks were moved from residential areas, right? It started to, as you correctly point out, but certainly I remember watching live reports where they were talking to people saying, we're not going. So you have two things going on there that would cast a lot of doubt on whether there actually is a breakthrough, kind of lending support to the government's position. What's your response to that?
First of all, I think it's the key question of the whole thing. And during the upcoming inquiry, that's going to be asked in a big, big way. So my response to that is that, yes, there was some walk-backing and some clarity that needed to take place. You can speak to that group. I was the mediator. I wasn't taking sides. I know in politics that sometimes other people work other people's Twitter accounts. I'm not sure that happened in that case, but let's get back to what we're really focused on.
Regardless, that message went out to support.
So regardless, I'm a little surprised that, being a former chief of staff, we never direct the police. And so I didn't make a single call as a mediator to the police. But I'd love to know what the Ottawa police had as a number, because I had as a number on Monday, dozens of trucks, 2 blocks, dozens of trucks got out of there. That might seem like a small amount, but when you're coordinating a group that's been sort of on different sides for a couple of weeks, kudos to the law enforcement and to the truckers that day for getting dozens out. We need to get the official account. That's going to come out in the inquiry. But this is my point. Why wouldn't Trudeau's cabinet have waited on the Sunday night to say, Mayor Watson, a very credible, respected mayor, has an agreement. Let's just wait 2 or 3 days to see if this peaceful resolution works. If it doesn't, if it's not real, then let's put down the hammer. But this is a black mark on Canadian history. History will show this was a total overreaction, in my opinion, and the inquiry is going to show that as well.
So let me ask you again and offer another challenge that for sure they could have waited a few more days. But at that point, you've hit 3 weeks. And while the people you were engaged with might have been there in good faith, there were a lot of other actors who were not, right? And so I think, and I remember the level of frustration here in Ottawa was so palpable at that point. And I know it's a hard hammer. And believe me, there are genuine questions for the government on that. I would never take away from that point. But it did stop after they put that hammer down, right? And it took 3 weeks to get to that point.
Well, it actually they started to move. But by the way, you make a really good point. I want to make it clear, there was different factions. The person that you met with, I would never have met with that individual. I would not have met with that individual. That would not have been a starter.
You mean Pat King?
Yes, absolutely. And I made it very clear to the group, anybody that wants to try to overthrow a duly elected government, you got the wrong mediator in the room. I got a plane that's waiting for me on the tarmac. I'm flying back to Toronto. Done. And they asked me, please stay. So I hear where you're coming from. But when I started to listen to the truckers, I had actually come up the week before just to observe. I jumped in a few big rigs. I talked to a few truckers and I listened. Here's what I found out that hasn't been reported. Most of those truckers were owner-operator business owners. Think about it, like that's a $300,000 to a $400,000 asset. Who's going to let you take that sort of television equipment and park it for 2 weeks? They had a story that needed to be heard. One of the stories, because they travel all over, was the breaking of the Constitution of the government as far as interprovincial mobility, the mobility rights of this country. Like, we have lawmakers here in Ottawa. If you don't like the mobility rights in the Constitution, walk into the legislature or the House of Commons and change the law. Don't break your own laws. These were the things I was hearing from the truckers. So as much as the truckers were obviously violating many laws that I don't defend, what I was hearing from them is our own government. And what I was hearing from former Premier Peckford from Newfoundland, who was the last living signature, I'd encourage you to put him on your show, to listen to him. Like, he was in the room in '82 when they put that together. There's a mechanism where we can actually get a court reference from the Supreme Court. Did we cross the line or not? And Canadians need to know that. Now, you can't say the ends justify the means. Every decision, as a former chief of staff, every decision has to start and end with the rule of law. And so what I was hearing the truckers was that on multiple occasions, they felt their own government had breached the Constitution of Canada. So that's a wider discussion.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for letting me express it.
No, and I think, you know what, a lot of that gets lost, and there's not a lot of genuine discussion that occurred, even in what led up to that. I think a lot of people have an understandable frustration about the lack of debate around mandates and that kind of thing. At the same time, the idea that the Prime Minister should have met with people, or that would also set a pretty extreme precedent, right? If you want to get the Prime Minister to sit down with you, you occupy the capital city of a country. I think a lot of Canadians would have trouble with that too.
I think there's a respectful way on both sides to act. A Canadian trait, though, is to listen. And Mayor Watson said, if you show some progress, I'll listen to you. The Prime Minister, look, like, where did this go?
It's just different with Watson versus the Prime Minister, insofar as, like, as you walked around there,
right,
there weren't a million flags saying F. Watson.
Right.
They were saying...
So let's move to the cabinet ministers. So media's done a great job with clarifying. One of the cabinet ministers was saying, look, X amount of money is coming from out of country. Later, the media did a great job of clarifying. 88% came from Canadians, not from overseas. So we had a cabinet minister saying that. We had another cabinet minister that was saying the police are asking for us to invoke the War Measures Act. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, multiple times. That has to be held to account. Mm-hmm.
And it is. I mean, it's coming through committee.
It is.
It's coming through. And at the same time, we hear from the police after, they wouldn't have been able to do their jobs without the invocation of that act. I think there's conversation around that too, but they have said that post.
Really, because I think the police had the tools to do their job. And that's why they didn't ask for such a drastic measure.
I get it, but they didn't use them.
Yeah, but that's not up to us to direct them. So for whatever reasons that happened, people have to look into that. Valid question, valid point.
Just really quick, final point. I've gone on way too long. Is the inquiry, you think, the right mechanism for this? Do you believe that the questions you have and others have will be answered through that? No. The Supreme Court of Canada, if you get a chance to interview former Premier Peckford and you talk about the reference that's available to all governments, both provincial and federal, to get a reference from the Supreme Court on everything that happened during the pandemic. Let's clear the air. Let's bring the temperature down. Did the federal and provincial governments break the Constitution? It's available in the Constitution. It's a story that's not being told. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Mr. French. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.